Film begins by showing a bus transporting prisoner to Wakefield Prison, but just as they are about to arrive, the bus stops suddenly because the guards have just caught a prisoner trying to escape. When the prisoner is brought onto the bus, everyone is shocked because his face is badly beaten. Upon arriving at the prison, the inmates were escorted through a very muddy field. Afterward, they were registered one by the guards. At that moment, a new inmate named Henry Brubaker was seen among the other prisoners. Before entering the cell, the guards cut their hair first, and usually, this haircut is free of charge. However, this prison is notorious for its corruption, so even the barber here abuses his role to enrich himself. The barber also allows the inmates to request a hairstyle as long as they are willing to pay, while those who do not wish to pay will receive a standard haircut. After the haircut, the prisoners are taken to the barracks where they sleep. From the looks of it, this place is very filthy, as if it has never been cleaned. And just like in the barber shop, the inmates have to pay a certain amount of money if they want to get a decent mattress. After that, they all have lunch in the canteen, where Henry immediately loses his appetite because the food looks like vomit. At night, the atmosphere in the prison cells seems cramped, with the inmates busy with their own activities. Some are busy fixing their beds, like Henry, while others are bullying fellow inmates. Soon after, a guard named Huai appears. He is the most powerful guard in the prison, even though he is not the head warden. Huai then ordered a guard named Eddie to punish a black inmate without any clear reason. Eddie quickly dragged the inmate mentioned by Huai and whipped him hundreds of times. It turned out that Huai did this to warn the new prisoners that he was a very brutal figure in the prison. The following days, the inmates are treated even more inhumanely, as they are punished if they refuse to obey the corrupt guards. This time, they are forced to work hard labor without any pay, even though they are entitled to it. During the lunch break, an inmate causes a commotion and is eventually whipped by Eddie. At the same time, the injured inmate was seen about to receive treatment in the prison clinic. But once again, this service is only available to those who can pay, even though by law, hospital clinics should be free. Feeling tortured, the injured inmate is forced to sell his blood to get money to use in the prison. Meanwhile, the other inmates are having lunch, while Henry immediately loses his appetite because the food served is spoiled, with many worms in it. After lunch break, the inmates are forced to work again. This time, some of them have to work in a wood processing factory, and the rest are placed on a farm. It turns out that these places are not state-owned land, but belong to local businessmen. So, these businessmen have a contract agreement with Huai to enslave the prisoners without having to pay. That day, Huai orders Henry to deliver processed meat ordered by one of the bar owners. It turns out that the bar is owned by the brother of Huai's girlfriend, so it can be said that he is truly exploiting the prison to enrich himself and his close associates. On the other hand, a prisoner named Bullen was seen paused from his work because his hand got a splinter. Unfortunately, the foreman there forced him to continue working. Angry, Bullen immediately dropped the wood that had already been loaded onto the truck. Because of this, Bullen was immediately transferred to solitary confinement as punishment. Seeing this, Henry wondered why this prison was so chaotic, as if it had no clear rules. The next day, Henry and other prisoners were ordered by a guard named Dickey to clean the solitary cells. At that moment, Dickey tried to persuade Huai not to involve Bullen for now, as he was still sick from the punishment the previous night. However, Huai insisted on forcing him to participate. As a result, Henry and Bullen entered the solitary confinement block, which was very dark, terrifying, and smelly. At that place, they had to clean buckets filled with prisoners' waste because there were no toilets at all in that place. As Henry was about to carry a bucket out of the block, suddenly one of the prisoners choked Bullen. It turned out that the prisoner did this because he was fed up with being in such inhumane solitary confinement, even though he had not committed a serious offense. Seeing this, Henry immediately entered the cell and tried to calm him down. Henry also finally revealed that he was the new warden who was undercover as a prisoner to investigate the prison. Initially, the brutal prisoner didn't believe Henry's words, but after being convinced multiple times, the prisoner finally acknowledged the truth. Henry then revealed that his real name was Henry Brubaker and promised to improve the solitary confinement so that prisoners would still receive justice. After the situation calmed down, Henry quickly saved Bullen before it was too late. A short while later, Dickey brought Henry to the warden's office because he was still doubtful about what he said. When they arrived there, Henry immediately explained that he was indeed the new warden sent by the ministry to reform this corrupt prison. After revealing his identity, the officers finally believed that Henry was truly the new warden, and on that very day, the old warden left the prison. The next day, Henry gathered all the prisoners in the yard to explain that he would be the leader of the prison. Additionally, Henry announced that he would abolish the ridiculous rules that had been in place and would treat the prisoners more humanely because a prison should be a place for repentance, not for committing more crimes. At that moment, Henry promised that there would be no more corruption in the prison, especially no extortion. After making the announcement, Henry was visited by the governor and council members who wanted to check the situation in the prison. They then held a meeting to discuss what had been happening there. Afterward, the officials offered to hold a formal inauguration for Henry, but Henry declined, saying it was not important. For him, the most important thing was that he had signed the necessary documents. Although one of the officials, named Lillian, tried to persuade him several times, Henry still refused, stating that he didn't like ceremonial events. After the officials left, Henry asked the assistant warden, named Purcell, to check on a prisoner who had once been severely injured after being attacked when he tried to escape. Before carrying out the task, Purcell offered to take on the role of assistant warden, but Henry didn't give a definite answer because he still couldn't trust Purcell. It was revealed that Henry suspected that almost all the officers in this prison were very corrupt, so he considered recruiting someone from outside. Not long after, the prisoners in solitary confinement were brought out to an open field, wearing sunglasses provided by Henry. At that moment, Henry implemented a new rule that allowed prisoners in solitary confinement the freedom to see the sun every day, and most importantly, they could not be confined for longer than their sentence. That evening, Purcell brought Bullen to Henry's official residence. The new warden then had a private conversation with Bullen about his criminal history, revealing that he had grown up in a harsh environment since his teenage years, which led him to a life of crime. During that time, Bullen frequently stole cars to survive. Knowing his interest in cars, Henry gave Bullen the opportunity to work in the prison's auto repair shop. Moreover, Bullen was appointed as the head representative of the inmates. Not long after, Henry received information about the prison environment from Dickey, who essentially explained that one of the prison guards had secretly been involved in theft. Hearing this, Henry asked Dickey to become his trusted confidant, while he would secretly reveal the entire background of the prison guards so that they would not become suspicious of him. A short while later, Henry received news that some inmates had been injured due to a collapsed ceiling. Henry immediately went to check on the situation and helped the injured inmates, but he had difficulty seeking help from a hospital because it was too far away. Therefore, Henry returned to the prison clinic to request the doctor's assistance. However, Henry discovered from one of the inmates that they were always charged a fee if they wanted treatment from the doctor. Filled with anger, Henry immediately fired the doctor for the sake of everyone's well-being in the prison. The next day, Henry questioned the discrepancy in the amount of food compared to the logistics records. Not long after, Henry was approached by a lumber businessman who had long been working with the prison to repair its roof, which was built by his company. However, this businessman also engaged in forced labor with the inmates, so Henry refused to work with him and terminated the contract despite the businessman's threats. Sometime later, the inmates began to notice significant changes since Henry took charge, particularly in terms of food. Now there was no spoiled food, let alone food infested with flies. Additionally, they were pleased because Henry often ate with them. After lunch, Henry inspected the field where the inmates worked. There, Henry discovered that the vegetables had been doused with gasoline. Not only that, he also found one of his livestock dead with gunshot wound. Amid his confusion, Henry found an illegal building within the prison grounds. Upon further investigation, it was revealed that the building was where the missing prison food was stored and where Hawaii and his lover lived. It turned out that Hawaii had been stealing the food stocks meant for the inmates, which explained why they were always served substandard meals. Without hesitation, Henry reclaimed all the stolen food and fired the prison's financial staff. Additionally, Henry relocated Hawaii so that he could no longer live inside the prison. Henry even went as far as to burn down the house. A few days later, Henry met with Lillian again at his official residence. At that moment, she seemed pleased with the positive changes Henry had brought to the prison. Lillian then informed him that the governor and the Central Prison Board would be coming for an inspection. However, Henry was a bit disappointed, as he was more concerned about the need for a prison doctor than the governor, whom he believed was only interested in showboating. Nevertheless, Lillian pointed out that Henry still needed the governor's support to secure backing from the central government to reform the prison system. Despite this, Henry continued with his reforms on his own. Surprisingly, prison life began to improve dramatically. Moreover, Henry often organized entertainment events that could be enjoyed by both the inmates and their visiting families. He also initiated an election program to select representatives among the inmates so their voices could be heard. After the election, the inmate council began to gather to discuss the rights and obligations within the prison. However, since they were inexperienced, they didn't know how to proceed. Thus, Henry guided them in establishing the prison's rule. Not long after, an elderly prisoner named Abraham came to see Henry as he allowed the inmate to speak privately. It was then Henry discovered that Abraham had been in prison beyond his court sentence. Moreover, Abraham had been forced to make coffins for the inmates who died from the guards' torture. Upon hearing this, Henry immediately planned to investigate the case. Before that, Henry met with the officials, as scheduled by Lillian. Unbeknownst to him, Huai, Purcell, and Eddie approached Abraham to ask what he had discussed with Henry. Since the old inmate refused to speak, they tortured him until he talked. At the meeting, Henry was attacked by the prison board for his policies, which were not favorable to the administration. Not only that, Henry was also criticized for terminating the contract with the lumber company that had long worked with the prison. Even the governor, who was present, accused Henry of disrupting the established system. Although Henry countered with facts about the corrupt prison system, the board didn't care much about it. As for then, the prison was merely a tool for their political agenda. Deeply disappointed, Henry left the meeting immediately. Upon returning to the prison, Henry was shocked to find Abraham dead. Because of this, Henry immediately began investigating the incident. When he entered his office, Henry found torture devices that seemed to have been placed there by Huai and his group as a warning. Furious, Henry was appalled by the people in this prison. According to Dickey, Henry's policies had threatened the lives of the corrupt guards. Therefore, he advised Henry to stop interfering with them for his own safety. Although aware of the dangers, Henry remained resolute. Then, with the help of the inmates, Henry began digging behind the prison to search for the bodies, as described by Abraham. At the same time, Huai and his companions watched nonchalantly, as if they believed they would not be punished even if found guilty. Shortly after, Henry received a phone call from Lillian, who also knew about the murder scandal and informed him that the officials wanted to speak with him again. The next day, they met at a horse farm, where the officials offered to finance the prison according to Henry's needs, as long as he agreed to stop the digging. They believed that continuing the excavation could threaten the reputation of Wakefield Prison as the best and most profitable prison in America. However, Henry stood firm in his decision, even though the senator threatened to imprison him. After returning to the prison, Henry resumed the excavation with the inmates, and eventually, they uncovered dozens of coffins containing the bodies of murdered inmates. Meanwhile, Huai was seen secretly gathered the guards. During this meeting, Huai tried to gain sympathy from the guards to act against Henry. This act only made Dickey sickened by Huai's behavior, especially when he casually blamed the late Abraham. Realizing this, Huai understood that he had lost his power. Therefore, Huai asked Eddie to escape from the prison with him. However, Eddie refused the offer, choosing instead to stay in the prison and take responsibility for his actions. The next day, an investigation team arrived to examine the bodies discovered by Henry. The investigation revealed that all the bodies showed signs of torture. Therefore, Henry ordered Purcell to gather the media to cover the case, threatening to expose his involvement if he refused. Shortly after, Henry was informed by one of the guards that Huai had escaped. Without hesitation, Henry immediately ordered the guards to hunt down Huai and capture him alive. After that, Henry, along with Bullen, headed to Huai's regular restaurant. At that moment, the owner tried to block their search, but Henry was undeterred. After searching for a while, Bullen finally found Huai with his girlfriend. Cornered, Huai sacrificed his girlfriend to distract Bullen, while he shot him dead. As a result, Huai was shot and killed by Henry, preventing him from being brought to justice. After the incident, officials held a meeting at the prison to discuss the discovery of the bodies, suspected to be victims of torture. Although the meeting was attended by witnesses, the governor, and other officials still attempted to cover up the scandal by claiming that the bodies were not those of prisoners, as they did not want the prison's reputation to be tarnished. In addition to covering up the case, they also blamed Henry for his decision to shoot White. However, Henry fought back by exposing the budget manipulation involving tax money and prison revenue. Henry knew that all the illicit money was lining the pockets of the officials. After saying this, Henry walked out of the prison without hesitation, knowing that the corrupt officials had already prepared a new warden to replace him. Outside the prison, the new warden delivered a speech to the inmates. While Dickey approached Henry as he was leaving and thanked him for his efforts. According to Dickey, all of Henry's policies were fair. To bid farewell to Henry, Dickey gave a loud applause that was heard by the inmates. Seeing this, the inmates ignored the new warden and joined in applauding Henry, for thanks to him, they could now live more decently and would not allow corrupt people to oppress them again. The film ends. Moral lesson from the story: when you're in prison, remember to bring extra cash for the free haircut and always check your lunch for worms. You never know what you might find in the fine print.